Thank you, Mr. Bernier, for the kind introduction, and I want to thank everyone who organized today and for inviting me to be your speaker, and thank you all for being here and being in attendance. When Mr. Gaudett asked me to speak, he gave me the power of the podium with little restriction on what I could say, which is always dangerous. And so, like any good Harvard scholar, when I was thinking about what I was going to say today, I came up with a theory. And so that's what I'm going to present today. And at the end, I'll be happy to take any questions you have on this or anything else you want to know. The theory that I have for you today is a working theory, my working theory, on how education changes us and what it demands of us. It is the result of much reflection that I have done on my education here at Prep and the education that Prep prepared me for at Harvard and to this day as I continue to take courses and to learn. I submit that there are two inevitable and involuntary truths about the education that we receive. And this applies equally to the students in the room who are still pursuing their education and the adults in the room whose educational careers have already finished. The first truth I will borrow from Francis Bacon, who was an Enlightenment philosopher and English statesman, who wrote in 1597 the words, "Scientia potestas est." For the Latin scholars in the room, you may know what that means. It translates in English as, knowledge is power. Now, I really like this particular expression, but I did some research and saw that variants of this idea have been around for a long time. The oldest reference I was able to find was from Proverbs chapter 24, verse 5. It says, "The wise are more powerful than the strong, and the learned than the mighty." Another variant of the idea was expressed by Ralph Waldo Emerson, who wrote in his essay Old Age, there is no knowledge that is not power. And I've heard this statement being used even in the modern day, especially people that are part of the educational reform movement. When I think about how knowledge is power, I think about it in three ways, which sometimes overlap. The most common one you'll be familiar with is economic success. You need to have an education in order to have a job. The better education you have, the better job you'll have. Probably you'll make more money, and you need money to buy a house, to have a car, and to support a family. The logic that knowledge will lead to more economic opportunity is something that definitely manifests itself in our society, which is why our families, our teachers, and our community leaders emphasize it so much. But of course, while there's a strong correlation between knowledge and economic success, it's not a perfect correlation. You can take your prep teachers, for instance. They may be some of the most knowledgeable people that we know in our society, but that doesn't make them the wealthiest. So in my mind, I think of them in a new category, which is status. They tend to be highly regarded for their knowledge, and they have earned our respect for their wisdom. Although when prep students skip their classes, they might doubt the high status that they've earned. And the final way of thinking about how knowledge is power is less obvious. So I'll explain this one using my own educational career stories from that. When I was a prep student, I would find myself often in compelling conversation on the second floor of a Roubaix hall. We would sit along the radiators against the windows because it was better than sitting on the floor. That eventually was prohibited for fear of breaking the radiators, but when no one was watching, we unlawfully persisted. And what were we talking about? Well, some of my favorites were strategies to bring down the price of APs and SATs, or taxation of religious institutions, or the merits of the Wall Street bailout. When I went to college, things got even worse. Sometimes my roommates and I, although we were burdened by coursework and pending exams, and even writing my senior thesis, we would drop everything to engage in intellectual discussion on various topics, from evidence of biological evolution, or the Supreme Court's jurisprudence on the product of nature doctrine, or even better, the merits of the Federal Reserve's quantitative easing strategy. And we would do this for hours, sometimes late into the night. And we would pay for it in the morning, of course, and the next day when we were burdened by even more work building up. Now you can ask yourself, why is it that a prep student would sit in the hallway in the morning up till the bell rings to have this kind of conversation? And why would college students do the same? And I think that the answer is that there's some inherent value and power in possessing knowledge, which we earn through conversations and debates like these. And as I think about it, yeah, that kind of makes sense for my coursework as well. The sole interest of my prep teachers was not my status or financial gain. Instead, they believed strongly in the pursuit of knowledge because knowledge is itself power. My friends, knowledge is power, and that's not only a message that I bring to you, but a message that I bring to my own students. I'm constantly trying to encourage them and motivate them to learn and to do well in school, because I know that their financial status and their status within society depends on it. And because knowledge in itself is a powerful force in our lives. Now that's only half the equation, that's the first truth. So let me get to the second. Having applied Bacon's idea that knowledge is power to our educations that we've received, I now want to expand on that theory. The second truth is scientia officium est. In English, this translates as knowledge is responsibility. Another translation of officium could also be service. So knowledge is service. Either way is fine for our purposes. To say this in a more explicit manner, I believe that our knowledge demands much of us and requires that we use our knowledge to make the world a better and more just place. Now, I came up with that particular phrase, not having found anything like it in the literature. However, I'm confident that many other people, have implicitly believed in the resourcefulness of education for the greater good. One historical example we might take is Nelson Mandela, who saw education as a way to encourage nation building in a country that's torn apart by war and division. And he famously said, "Education is the greatest tool that we can use to change the world." Similarly, Martin Luther King saw education as a means of character building within individuals that would lead to more tolerance, peace, and justice. And as we stand in this institution of learning, we can't forget the example of the Jesuits, beginning with Ignatius Loyola, Francis Xavier, and others, who sought to educate others ad majorem Dei gloriam, for the greater glory of God. You see, having knowledge of the world binds us morally to the problems of others, because we are called to be at the service of our fellow man. Indeed, Prep and other Jesuit institutions pride themselves on the calling to be men and women for others. And the more we know, the greater our burden. This is true for two reasons. One, when we have knowledge of some problem, we are not in ignorance of it. And when we are not in ignorance of it, it weighs on our conscience. And that awareness will always exist. As much as we try to forget about the problems of the world around us, we cannot really do so. We can ignore them, but we can never really forget. Second, having more knowledge means a greater burden, because the more knowledge that we have, the greater ability we have to deal with those problems and to craft solutions. I know that Prep believes in the notion that knowledge is responsibility and service, because I saw it when I was here as a student. Prep students travel to other nations like El Salvador, Ecuador, and Jamaica to immerse themselves in the struggle of those communities and to perform acts of service. Similarly, they put themselves at the service of those who live in poverty here in our own nation, including in Appalachia and in our own city of Bridgeport. And they engage in projects of Christian service that range from supporting children attending inner-city schools and after-school programs, to assisting the disabled, to community development. At Prep, the burden of others is our burden. Here, students seek to learn more about those burdens and are encouraged to think critically and creatively about solutions. On this matter, I think that the Handbook of Christian Service speaks volumes, so I'll read you some of the things that I found in the document. Working for justice is neither optional nor the responsibility of only a few, but is the vocation of all Christians. Fairfield Prep insists that service is an essential element of Jesuit secondary education, not a frill or an add-on in which a student may or may not choose to participate. Fairfield Prep is serious about its commitment to service to others, and it expects its students to share in that commitment. My friends, today my message is Scientia potestas et officium est. Knowledge is power and responsibility. Through the education that we've received, and that many in this room are still pursuing, we are given a tremendous and valuable gift. One that not everyone in our world is fortunate enough to have. The knowledge that we have received will serve us well as we go through our lives. But as we use the knowledge that we have gained for our own good, let us also resolve to employ that knowledge for the service of others. For we can make a difference. We are the solution that we have been looking for. Thank you and God bless.